Well, good evening. Thank you so much for coming here. You don't know how much I'm honored it is to be able to stand in front of rational, kind, beautiful. And very happy my mom came up all the way from Irvine. I want to thank Scott for opening up his beautiful, amazing, one-of-a-kind home. My most interesting comments have been when I tweet out a picture of me speaking right now. I also want to thank the hosts and sponsors that made this evening possible. So thank you, Cora Robin, for all your help and support. We also have Glenn Beek, Natalie and David Herbst, Mattel Pack, the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors, Mark Salzberg, and Connie Sullivan. Thank you so much for being here. And also I want to thank Neil Michelin, who I've known for a very long time, for the wonderful job he does as a local elected official in Hawthorne. So, thank you. We met actually in 1999, Torrance leadership. So thank you. So I'm going to talk about three things tonight, and then I'll answer any questions you may have on any issue. It'll be sort of an order of more depressing to less depressing. So I'm on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm going to talk about North Korea. I'm also on the House Judiciary Committee. I will talk about what happened today with Michael Cohen.
Bueller's still there?
And then, so I just checked, he's still there. And then I'm going to talk about how we flipped the House. So in terms of North Korea, I want you to understand the problem that we have. It is a problem if North Korea gets ICBMs upon which it can put a nuclear warhead that can survive re-entry and land on account of the United States. That is absolutely a problem. On the other hand, if you believe that the leader of North Korea is not suicidal, if you believe that the minute he gets this operational, he's going to launch and know he's going to get destroyed, if you don't believe that he's suicidal, if you believe he's rational, then you would have a very different outlook on North Korea. Because on any given day, right, the United States can be annihilated by countries like Russia and China. The reason we're not is because we deter them. Countries like China and Russia and others that have nuclear weapons understand that if they struck the United States with a nuclear weapon, we have enough nuclear weapons and a second strike capability, bombers, ICBMs, submarines, that we would destroy whoever attacked us. So there's no reason that you couldn't deter the leader of North Korea if you thought he was not suicidal. Our intelligence agencies have assessed that he is not suicidal. He's not doing this because he wants to immediately launch at us, and then he can do that. They've assessed he's doing this because he views it as a way to preserve his regime. North Koreans have said, look, we saw what you did with Libya when you told Muammar Gaddafi to give up his nuclear weapons program. Then you killed him. And we saw what happened in Iraq, where Saddam Hussein did not have a nuclear weapons program, he took him out. So if you believe that that's how they view it, then you would think, well maybe we could deter North Korea the same way we deter Russia, China, and other countries the same way. And why is that important? It's important because here's a second huge problem with North Korea. I served on active duty in the Air Force, at Anderson Air Force Base in Guam. I'm still in the reserves. When I was in Guam, we did a whole series of military exercises, much of it directed against North Korea. The U.S. has exactly zero good military options against the North Korean regime. A number of reasons for this. First, we have very little intelligence on the regime. We don't know how many nuclear weapons they have, nor where they are all stored. So last year, Congressman Ruben Gallego and I, he's a Marine, we wrote a letter to the Pentagon, and we said, look, you stated that your objective is to denuclearize North Korea. If you were going to do it by force, how would you do it? Could you just launch airstrikes and cruise missiles and take out their nuclear weapons? And they came back and wrote a very frank and honest letter to us. We read it, we're like, we're surprised they responded. And second, we think they want us to publish this letter. So we did. We put it out there, and the Washington Post did a front page story on it. And the Pentagon basically said we would need a ground invasion, which means it would be extremely bloody, but also it takes time. any ground invasion doesn't end in a day or two, which means that we actually could not locate all their nuclear weapons in time. They would be able to launch one or more nuclear weapons at South Korea, where in addition to millions of South Koreans, we have over 200,000 Americans on any given day. They could potentially launch at Tokyo, or they could potentially launch at Guam. So that is a problem we don't know how to solve. We don't know how to do anything against North Korea with the use of force without the potential they can launch nuclear weapons and kill a lot of people, including Americans. But let's just take nuclear weapons out of this picture. Let's just say they don't use it. In terms of chemical weapons alone, the public reporting is they have over 5,000 tons of chemical weapons. When I was in Guam, we would do these chemical weapons exercises where I'd put on this chemical weapons gear. I hated doing that because it's already hot, right, in Guam. Then you put on this thing, it gets even hotter. It's bulky, you walk around, your eyesight is sort of not that great. But I remember doing this, and every time we would do this, I would think, 99% of the people on this island do not have access to this suit. So they would die. And that's the same problem you have in Seoul. Maybe the US military might be able to get access to some of these suits, but a lot of civilians in Seoul would perish if they chose to launch chemical weapons munitions into South Korea. But let's say they don't do that. Let's just say it's just based on normal conventional warfare. North Korea has this massive amount of artillery, much of which they hide in mountains. And what happens is the artillery goes out of the mountain, fires, and it's in the backside of the mountain. So you imagine a mountain, it comes out of the backside of the mountain, fires a projectile over the mountain, lands in Seoul.
Oh my God.
So it's hard to destroy. And then you have to think about the order of battle, which I'm not expecting you to really think about that. So I'm going to tell you what happens. In the way that the U.S. military conducts our wars and operations, we have an amazing Air Force. We will gain air superiority. But to do that, the first thing we do is we knock out the air defenses. So if you remember the shock and awe of the Iraq War, you saw a lot of bombing, right, of Iraq. That wasn't just one day. That took many days of just constant airstrikes and bombings. First is to knock out the air defenses. So before our airplanes go up and start attacking things, we try to knock out all the air defenses first, which is fine. But in the meantime, their artillery is launching up to 50,000 shells a day onto Seoul, just destroying buildings, killing people. They've done war games. I was at an Aspen Institute conference in North Korea. I happened to sit next to a former two-star general who was the chief of operations at U.S. Forces in North Korea, and he said, we'll do these war games, and he goes, in the first 5 days, the South Korean army loses half their army. It's because the way we win is what happens is in the first week, we suffer heavy losses. Basically, they're constantly shelling Seoul and our military bases and South Korean bases. We gain their superiority over a matter of days, and then we start landing reinforcements. And then eventually we push North Koreans back. So that's basically sort of how we win. But in the meantime, a lot of people die. And the other problem that I don't expect you to think about, but is a reality in the Korean Peninsula, is because these two armies are very close to each other, they join very quickly, which means your airplanes have a hard time now striking targets, right? Because everyone's mixed up. And once North Korea enters Seoul, which the military is going to do pretty quickly, you're not going to level a building in Seoul because there's North Korean soldiers in it. So it makes it much harder to use our air superiority. And in addition, just in terms of personnel, the U.S. has 28,500 troops in South Korea. The South Korean army is about 500,000. The North Korean army is 1.1 million. So we start out outnumbered, outgunned, outmatched. And it's not a scenario like the Iraq War, where we can, for months, just start landing tanks and brigades and start building up forces, because North Korea would attack once they saw us start doing that. So every scenario that happens, we start out in a very bad position, which is why you should read this New York Times article that came out a few weeks ago. It's fascinating because they reported on a classified military war game exercise on North Korea. And the first thing you should think is, why are we reading about this? This is a classified war game exercise. How did it get in the paper? I think it got there because people who ran this got so freaked out, someone leaked it. And in there's this quote from the Army Chief of Staff, who basically realizes halfway through this exercise, he says, the brutality of this is beyond the experience of any living soldier. So you have these military generals understanding what a massive problem this is. So this is where we are, which is why I support everything else except the use of force. I voted for the strongest economic sanctions ever on North Korea. That takes some time to take effect. We have to let that play its course. I support diplomacy. I support the president talking to a leader in North Korea. What I don't support is going in there with half your team missing. So right now, the president still has not nominated a U.S. ambassador to South Korea. The leading North Korean expert in the Trump administration, or Special Envoy to North Korea, resigned last month. So you're sort of going into this high-stakes negotiating scenario with half your team missing, which is really sort of stupid. Oh, we don't actually have a Secretary of State either. So we've got these problems. So my hope is there's no real reason to rush this. He doesn't have to do it in May. There's nothing, amazing about the month of May. They got to do this. I would rather have a team that is knowledgeable, experienced, that can actually brief our president before he walks in there to do this. So that's my sense. But regardless, diplomacy is much better than tweeting about how big your nuclear button is. So happy to answer any question, North Korea. That's where we are. So I'm going to move on to something a little less depressing. Last month, Congresswoman Kathleen Rice and I wrote a letter. We're both former prosecutors. And we wrote a letter to the FBI asking them to open an investigation on Michael Cohen. So I don't know how much effect our letter had, but it's clear they've opened an investigation on Michael Cohen. I don't care what our president has done in his private life. What I do care is were their laws broken. And according to Michael Cohen's own words, he spent $130,000 of his own money to pay off Stormy Daniels so she wouldn't say bad things about the president weeks before the election. Any reasonable person that has looked at campaign finance law that looks at this will conclude that is a massive in-kind contribution way beyond federal contribution rates.
That's right.
An in-kind contribution doesn't have to be a direct payment to the campaign. It can be a payment that helps the campaign. So if you spend a bunch of money on polling and then you give it to the campaign, that polling costs $20,000, that's an in-kind contribution. So in this case, the maximum contribution Michael Cohen could have given to this campaign was $5,400. He gave $130,000. That is a huge, massive violation, and any violation over $25,000 becomes a felony. Yeah. Which is why we asked the FBI to investigate. Now, there's also been some public reporting that he coincidentally got a payment of $129,000 and some change a little bit later. So if he was paid back for this, it doesn't change the fact that his first contribution was in-kind contribution. What it does is it shows he may have also tried to cover up the true source of the funds. And prosecutors have routinely put people into prison for concealing the true source of the campaign donation. So I think he's in some pretty big trouble. Our letter actually also asked for an investigation of the National Enquirer because they did something similar. They spent a bunch of money to pay off Karen McDougal, who was a former Playboy Playmate that also was going to say bad things about the president. They also did it a few months before the election. And they brought her story. She thought they were going to publish it. What they did is they brought the story and they killed it. My understanding is, based on public reporting in the media, they call it catch and kill. So they got the story and they killed it. But the problem is, That's also a campaign finance violation. Well, first of all, it was a lot of money. It was way over $5,400. If it was done for the purpose of assisting the Trump campaign. So we'll see if they open an investigation into that issue. You should understand how unique it is to have search warrants go out against an attorney. Usually you're very careful against lawyers, so they have attorney-client privilege. So the Department of Justice, actually, it wasn't even the Department of Justice. What happened today, according to public reporting, is Special Counsel Mueller had evidence that he viewed was bad, that he thought Michael Cohen may have been engaged in crimes. So he refers the issue to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, a Trump appointee. So the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, that person could have said, thank you, and then done nothing. But that person didn't do that. That person did the most extreme possible thing, which is issue or request search warrants, multiple, from a federal judge who approved them, and then they searched their home, hotel room, and office of Michael Cohen, a lawyer. And they had to meet a higher bar because they had to have a search team composed of people who were going to be able to seize attorney-client privilege material and be walled off from the other folks on the investigation. And then they have to have a separate team review the attorney-client privilege material. So it's very complicated, and they had to convince a federal judge to authorize this. A federal judge had to look at the following factors, one of which is, could they have gotten this another way? Could they just have asked? So the judge had to be convinced that no, if they had asked, either Cohen wouldn't have produced it or he would have destroyed the evidence. In addition, the judge had to have concluded that there was a reasonable probability, or that the standard is a reasonable person would conclude that Cohen may have engaged in one or more crimes. That is the probable cause standard. So a judge found that. And that's why you had all these search warrants executed today. And then you had the president that just sort of went unhinged. So he said this was disgraceful. He blamed Attorney General Sessions. He blamed Robert Mueller, even though Robert Mueller didn't do this. Right? The decision was made by U.S. Attorney for Southern District of New York. He said weird things about Rod Rosenstein. He seemed to have praised him and then not really liked what happened. And then he said something interesting. He said, this is an attack on our country. So I did this tweet today. It went something like this. It said, Dear Donald Trump, you and your lawyer are not our country. The American people constitute our country. And what the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York and the federal judge did is they vindicated the rule of law upon which our country relies on. So that's where we are today. We have now evidence that has been seized by FBI agents from Trump's longtime lawyer, Michael Cohen. And they're going to review that information and see what it is. It may be related to the Stormy Daniels campaign finance violations. It may be something totally different. It could be bank fraud. Right? There's been public reporting, it may be that. But whatever it is, it caused the U.S. Attorney for Southern District of New York and a federal judge to conclude that Michael Cohen had committed crimes, which is very troubling. And when you sort of think about it, our president sure does surround himself with a lot of bad people. His former national security advisor has pled guilty to a felony. His former campaign official on his national security team has pled guilty to a felony. His former campaign advisor has been indicted. His son-in-law is under multiple investigations. And now his lawyer just got all his files seized. So these are the folks that our president surrounds himself with. So we'll see what happens. And my view is we need to do whatever we can to protect Robert Mueller and make sure his investigation continues. now, let me also take a step back. The president seems to have this weird view that if he were to fire Mueller, somehow this all goes away. No. There are three people leading this investigation. You have Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, a Republican, appointed twice by Republican presidents. You have FBI Director Christopher Wray, a Republican, who, by the way, gave over $37,000 of campaign donations exclusively to Republicans. And then you have Robert Mueller, a Republican and a war hero. These are not Democratic stooges. And the notion that somehow they're trying to do this Democratic coup is the furthest thing from the truth. In addition, this investigation of Michael Cohen is totally separate, right? It's run by the U.S. Attorney for Southern District of New York. That keeps on going. The investigation of Jared Kushner by Brooklyn prosecutors, that keeps on going. If they have evidence, for example, that Mike Pence, let's say, committed a crime, that's just going to keep on going. I mean, you've got a massive staff of FBI agents, prosecutors, they're just working on these cases. That doesn't just stop because one person gets removed. What they'll do is they'll put another person in there. But these career people all took an oath, and they all know they took an oath to the Constitution, not to the president. And you saw that happen today, right? You had Trump's own appointee uphold the rule of law. It's pretty amazing to watch. So that's where. So now let me tell you how we get a backstop to all this. If we flip the House, we get something called subpoena power. We would control it. That means we could subpoena documents. We can subpoena witnesses. You would know what's in Trump's tax returns. So there's an entire backstop to this. If the president goes unhinged and starts fighting everyone, if we flip the House, we can conduct real investigations. And that is one thing that is at stake in November. So last month we had to flip 24 seats. This month it's 23. We flipped a seat in Western Pennsylvania that Donald Trump won by 20 points. But that's not an aberration. It is consistent with everything that's happened starting from last year. So after the president got elected, there's been about 40 special elections, most of them in state legislative seats. So last November, we swept Virginia. Double-digit gains in state legislative seats, took back the governorship. We flipped the governorship in New Jersey. We went to Washington State, flipped the state Senate back to Democratic control. We went into Georgia, won 3 state seats in deep red Georgia. We went into deep red Oklahoma, won the state seat. And then this year, we went into rural Wisconsin in the state Senate district, flipped it by 27 points. Donald Trump won it by 17, our candidate wins by 10. And then in a race that made U.S. history, we flipped a seat in Kentucky by 86 points. So it's been an average of about 15 to 20 points. So this November, if we had a 20-point flip in every congressional district, 123 Republicans would lose their jobs.
Yeah.
Do not quote me on that because it's not going to happen. However, if just 1/4 of that behavior change happens in terms of voter shift, we flip the House. And of the 23 seats we have to win, it just so happens there are 23 seats nationwide that Hillary Clinton won the congressional district in 2016. There's an additional 9 that Barack Obama won twice. So in over 30-some of these districts, we just have to do one thing. If we do one thing, we win if we energize Democrats. There's about another third of the districts where we have to energize the base and then get independents to vote with us. And then there is a last third where we have to energize the base, get independents to vote with us, and get moderate Republicans to either not vote or vote with us. That's what we did in Conowland District. And what was amazing about that race is we were also outspent more than 2 to 1. And the Republicans spent a massive amount of money, even though they knew the district was changing. Because they didn't want us to have this one talking point, which is what I'm making right now. We just beat you in a 20-point district that Trump won. So his district actually goes from a district that Trump won by 20 points to a district that Hillary Clinton won by 1. So Conor Lamb is basically going to win again in November. And why did that district change? Because a very good thing happened, which is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court struck down the map in terms of districts. There are 7 states in which federal courts have intervened. I'm sorry, where courts have intervened and said these maps are drawn so horrendously to benefit Republicans that we're going to step in and basically take up the cases to see if we need to change their maps. 6 of them were federal courts. So Supreme Court said we're going to look at this issue too. They're taking our review. Those maps, the decision affecting those maps will be for the 2020 cycle. Pennsylvania got smart, and they said, okay, we're going to sue just on the state constitution. And the state Supreme Court made a decision that basically said, we're making the decision based just on the Pennsylvania state constitution. So the U.S. Supreme Court could not take that case up, which is why the maps have changed for this cycle. And you should look at the maps. You can just Google search for these, just type in Pennsylvania redistricting maps. They're beautiful. They're like logical, straight. It just makes a lot of sense. But it helps Democrats. And why? Because if maps are drawn without gerrymandering, the state popular vote, if the party wins it, it means you'll win the congressional districts. So Pennsylvania tends to go Democratic. And if you look at Democratic elections, except for this past one, but if you look at Democratic elections, we always win the popular vote, not just in presidentials, but in midterms. The only reason Republicans control Congress is they gerrymandered all these districts, where you win a popular vote and you still lose these districts. But as these districts start changing, then it becomes nearly impossible for Republicans to hold their majority. Over time, as these districts start changing, either because of demographics, because courts strike it down, then the party that wins a popular vote wins Congress. And you're seeing that in Pennsylvania because not only is Conor Lamb going to win in November, a Republican incumbent by name of Costello basically just said, I quit. He had filed for re-election after these maps came out, and after the U.S. Supreme Court didn't take it out, he basically said, I'm not running for re-election. So now our Democratic opponent actually doesn't know who her opponent is. So there's a little chaos here, but we're going to win that seat because he just said, I can't win the seat, I quit. There's additional 2 to 3 additional seats where all of a sudden the Republican incumbents are in deep trouble. So we're going to gain a whole bunch of seats just because of one redistricting case. So you can imagine these other 6 states, if it got their maps redistricted, we would all gain a lot more seats. So that's good. The other reason that we're doing well for November, specifically California, is we have a structural thing happening where we had this very interesting governor election in November. We have a very interesting lieutenant governor's election, a very interesting, well, no one really cares about the insurance commissioner, but still it's sort of interesting. So we have all these interesting statewide elections of great interest to Democrats. Republicans know they will never win a statewide race in California. So in November, there's not a lot of incentive for them to vote. But for Democrats, you have all these statewide campaigns trying to pull out Democratic voters. And that helps every candidate down ballot. The other structural advantage we have is I supported a bill that's now law that says if you go to the DMV and register, you automatically become a voter unless you specifically opt out. So they'll add 500,000, almost 500,000 people to our voter registration rolls. That tends to help Democrats. And of the 23 seats that we have to flip where Hillary Clinton won, 7 are in California, 5 are in Southern California. We added 2 more because the Republican incumbents are clowns. One is in San Diego. It's Duncan Hunter. It is. It's a hard district, but he's also under FBI investigation. He was spending his committee funds on toys for his kids, other personal items, just flat out violations of the law. And we're also targeting Devin Nunes. So your contributions to Ted Lieu for Congress are awesome and deeply appreciated. It helps me make sure that I get reelected, but in addition, I use these funds to do things like what I just did a few days ago, which is I went to Devin Nunes' district. He refused to do a town hall. He actually hasn't done a town hall for years. So I did one for him. And it was a lot of fun. And I had protesters too, but worked with Indivisible and Democratic groups and so on. I also did one in Dana Rohrabacher's district last year. And so these funds allow me to do that. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I'm going to do more of them as well. If you looked at these two districts, all the 9 districts in California all perform better than the Connerland district in Western Pennsylvania. So there's no reason that we couldn't flip these 9 districts, especially if we have a wave coming. And then let me conclude, because I want you all to understand the power that you have to affect change. So I think Abraham Lincoln had it right when he said public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. I remember being extremely sad election night, all the way to the evening of January 20th. And then on January 21st, I woke up. I saw these unbelievable women's marches across America. And a few thoughts crossed my mind. The first was, this is the America I know. I feel much better. Second, wow, we're much kinder and rational and beautiful and happier. And third, we're flipping the house. It was just very clear to me the energy that I saw. And you saw that replicated with amazing March for Our Lives that happened. And do not underestimate the power of just showing up to these marches, to rallies, to protests. That makes a huge difference. Think about writing letters to the editor. Many newspapers don't get letters to the editor from different people. They keep getting it from the same folks. So when you start writing in, after a while, high chance you'll get published. You can amplify your voice. Think about volunteering on campaigns that are nearby. So we're targeting Steve Knight's district in Ventura, LA County. We're targeting 3 districts in Orange County, Ed Royce's district, he's retired. Mimi Walters, as well as Dana Rohrabacher, and then Daryl Isaw's district in San Diego. So you can go volunteer as well. And then think about social media, right? It's free. You write a tweet or a Facebook post that resonates. Someone in Kentucky might read it who's a voter, or in Florida, or in Orange County. So understand your power to make a difference. And with that, thank you for being here, and look forward to your answering any questions you may have.